Headlines for today: Tigray government has lodged joint report of the atrocities in western Tigray and regrets report fails to call what has happened by its proper name. The government of Tigray also says the international community's failure to act on Tigray's genocide is colossal violation of its ethnic, moral, as well as legal obligations. And the WHO chief has said Ethiopia's Tigray region is under the longest and one of the worst siege amongst human history. As we move on to the main stories for today, the government of Tigray lauds Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch joint report of atrocities in the western Tigray region. In a statement issued today, the government of Tigray said it is grateful to the human rights watchdogs for highlighting a litany of atrocities that the ethnic Amhara forces, with the full backing of the Ethiopian and Eritrean armies, committed to and continue to commit against the Tigrayans in western Tigray. The statement noted that findings of their joint investigation that catalog horrific violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law have rightly shocked the entire international community. It stated that these in-depth findings merely confirm what the people of Tigray have always known. The statement added, "Our adversaries have committed unimaginable atrocities against Tigrayans to create new demographic facts on the ground critical in reinforcing their baseless territorial claims and legitimizing their forcible annexation of Tigray and constitutionally recognized territory." And they underlined, adding, "The vicious crimes committed against Tigrayans represent only the tip of the iceberg. Given the obvious obstacles to a genuinely independent and comprehensive investigation that have been erected by the invading forces, the report does not even begin to scratch the surface when it comes to documenting the true scale of the barbaric crimes committed against Tigrayans," as the statement stressed. The government of Tigray said that as long as the occupying Amhara forces and their foreign backers continue to roam freely within the western Tigray region, grave violations of internationally recognized human rights law will continue to be unabated, with even ferocious lethality. The government of Tigray said it firmly believes that given the systematic and widespread nature of human rights violations, as well as the multiplicity of actors involved in all stages of the genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray, only genuinely independent investigations can then provide a full accounting of what has transpired and continues to transpire today. It noted that the integrity of the comprehensive as well as credible investigation depends on the preservation of key forensic evidence to be dug up by mandated entities. It called on the international community to condemn in the strongest possible term the Amhara regional government's desecration of the remains of Tigrayans massacred by the Amhara forces for the purpose of destroying evidence. In related development, the government of Tigray regretted that the joint report by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch fell short of calling the documented atrocities what it is, a genocide. A government of Tigray said despite their commendable efforts to highlight the despicable atrocities committed against the people of Tigray, the human rights watchdogs refrained from calling the murderous campaign against Tigrayans by its proper name, genocide. It added, despite brutality and scope of the crimes that have shocked the collective consciousness of the entire international community, the world has by large decided to deter and dither as to whether genocide is taking place in western Tigray, choosing to deploy expressions that underplay the extent of Tigrayans' suffering. If the legal determination of genocide is to come after Tigrayans have been thoroughly wiped out, it would do the people of Tigray absolutely no good, as the government of Tigray stated in their statement. The government of Tigray also stressed that the failing to act on these devastatingly exhaustive findings will be colossal violations of ethical, moral, and legal obligations on the part of the international community. The international community, given the extensively documented genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray, including the current Amnesty and Human Rights Watch report, and multiple early warning signs that went unheeded, cannot continue to invoke ignorance as a defense against failure to intervene. It emphasized and added that in spite of the failure to act thus far, it is never too late for the international community to prevent the rules-based architecture of global governance from being violated at will to obsolescence. With the siege on Tigray still intact and over 7 million people cut off from humanitarian assistance, other basic necessities, the government of Tigray said the choice is stark: stand with humanity and prevent a full-scale extermination projected by the Abiy Ahmed regime and its allied partners, or make empty rhetorical gestures while cajoling those who planned, aided, and abetted the commission of some of the worst atrocities in human history. The United States responded to the statement and reiterates its grave concern over continuing reports of ethnically motivated atrocities committed by the Amhara authorities in western Tigray, Ethiopia. Referring to the recent joint report by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, the U.S. State Department released a statement in which it said it is deeply troubled by the report's finding that these acts amount to ethnic cleansing. The note stated, "We note with the utmost alarm that the thousands of Ethiopians of Tigray ethnicity reportedly continue to be detained arbitrarily in life-threatening conditions all over western Tigray." The State Department urged the immediate release of remaining detainees and called on the relevant authorities to grant international monitors access to all detention facilities. The statement added that there must be credible investigation into and accountability for atrocities committed by any party to the conflict as part of the lasting solution to the crisis. The State Department urged the government of Ethiopia to cooperate with the UN Commission of Experts on Human Rights in Ethiopia. It also renewed the U.S.'s call on all armed actors to renounce and end human rights abuses and violence against civilians as whole. The United States reiterated its call for all foreign forces to withdraw from Ethiopia, as well as for the regional state authorities to remove their security forces from neighboring regions. The State Department said it continues to urge all parties to take necessary steps to ensure the cessation of hostilities, unhindered and sustained humanitarian access, transparent investigation into all human rights abuses, as well as the violations by all actors, and a negotiated resolution to the conflict within Ethiopia whole. WHO chief also made a remark in regards to Amnesty's and WHR's report, says the international community needs to help Ethiopia's Tigray region, which he called is under the longest and worst siege amongst human history. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom made the call at a joint press briefing in Washington, D.C. on Thursday with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra. He acknowledged that the international community was taking steps to ending the crisis, but added that it's just not enough. Let's take a listen.
Tigray has been under siege by Eritrean and Ethiopian forces for more than 500 days now. This is the longest and the worst siege in modern history. Maybe I can personalize it. You may be surprised if I tell you almost all of my relatives who live in Tigray, I haven't spoken to them in 500 days because telecom is cut off. There is no media allowed into Tigray. There is a problem with medicine, access to medicine. There is no medicine, no banking services. Relatives asked for support. I couldn't even send the money because there is no banking service. It's basics. It's very tragic. I don't know even what word to use. Of course, the international community is trying, but it's not enough.
The WHO chief praised the United States and its president, Joe Biden, for their efforts and contributions to beat COVID-19 around the entire world, including in Africa, but also acknowledged that several other challenges still remain, including Ukraine, where Russia's invasion has displaced millions of people, and in Ethiopia's Tigray region, where government forces are preventing full humanitarian access. He noted that the atrocities and the massacres are being committed regularly within Ethiopia, and with some people being burned alive because of their ethnicity and their ethnicity alone. On the humanitarian scale, only 8% of cash and the needs have been transferred to Tigray for humanitarian operation since the 12th of July 2021. And according to OSHA, 36 partners transferred approximately $1.7 million in cash from 31st of March to the 5th of April. The amount of cash allowed, however, remains below the cash needed to support operations and the programs to provide a meaningful response at the required scale. OSHA's partners estimate that $6 million is required per week. Accordingly, about $300 million should have been transferred to the region since last year, the 12th of July specifically, to facilitate humanitarian operations. However, only approximately $26.5 million and 8% has entered the region in those 9 months. Only fuel tankers of 47,000 liters also arrived in Tigray region last week, the first fuel delivery to enter the region in nearly 8 months. It is estimated that 200,000 liters of fuel is required every week to carry out the humanitarian operations at the scale in dire need within the region. Outside of the humanitarian crisis, the Tigrayan school system has also been obliterated, and 80 schools in Tigray have been closed and 641 more are currently at risk of closure just due to insufficient or of absence of school feeding programs as well. In Tigray, no school feeding was reported during the week due to lack of food stocks. It also reported that 80 schools in 13 different waradas are currently closed. The update also indicated an additional 641 schools are at risk of closure due to insufficient or absence of school feeding programs, lack of food for teachers, lack of learning materials, or just completely insecurity. An estimated 1.4 million children, which half of them girls, are entering their 3rd year without access to learning in the region. More than 144,000 primary school students and 25,000 children are accessing alternative learning programs are at risk of dropping out of school. More than 46,000 teachers across the region require immediate, life-saving, multi-purpose cash and food assistance just to keep the remaining schools open as well as afloat. Our final update today, the Horn of Africa Director of Human Rights Watch says there does not need to be a truce for warring parties to just simply allow unhindered humanitarian access. While speaking to Al Jazeera on the recent report by her organization and Amnesty International, Letitia Bader said humanitarian access cannot be used as a political tool. Let's take a listen.
Under international humanitarian law, there does not need to be a truce for warring parties to allow unhindered humanitarian access. And I think it is important to continue to underline that what we have been seeing in Tigray in particular, and the ongoing obstruction of humanitarian assistance going in as a result of federal government policies and actions, but also regional authorities, security forces, etc. This constitutes, an effective siege and is a violation in itself. And I think it's important to continue to underline that humanitarian access cannot be used as a political tool. It should not be used as a consensus-building measure. It is a responsibility of all the warring parties to allow that going in.
Gebra Selassie Gebra Christos, founder and editor of Tahad.com, who also spoke in the same discussion on Al Jazeera, acknowledged that the joint report by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International has started to just scratch the surface of the crimes committed in Tigray. Regarding the government's claim of aid flowing into Tigray, he had this to say.
Aid is not getting into Tigray. They only let about 21 trucks only to reset the narrative. That is to kind of they got the news, they got the image that aid is getting into Tigray. We are now more than 2 weeks since they announced that. They only allowed 1 day 21 trucks, while we know that about 100 trucks are supposed to enter Tigray every day. So they have got the image, they have got the narrative in the international media that the aid is getting into Tigray, but the policy is, like I said before, reducing the Tigrayan population through starvation, massacres, ethnic cleansing, and it is working every second, every minute, every hour, and they are succeeding in this.
Ghebreselassie Ghebrekristos stressed that the Ethiopian government's siege currently and the blockade of Tigray as part of its genocidal campaign against the people of the region, which still continues today. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.